Part 1. The Unlikely Hero. Robert Williams never thought his life would end up like this. Just 4 years ago, he was living in a nice 2-bedroom house with his wife Linda, working steady hours at the Riverside Ranch just outside town. He had calloused hands from years of working with horses, a reliable truck, and enough money in the bank to feel secure. Life wasn't fancy, but it was good. Then everything fell apart. It started when Linda got sick. What they thought was just tiredness turned into doctor visits, then hospital stays, then a cancer diagnosis that changed everything. The medical bills came fast and heavy. Even with insurance, the treatments cost more than Robert could have imagined. He took out loans against the house, maxed out credit cards, and sold everything they owned that had any value. Linda fought hard for 2 years. Robert never left her side except to work, and even then he was constantly worried. The ranch owner, Mr. Peterson, was understanding at first. He let Robert take time off for doctor appointments and hospital visits. But as Linda got sicker and Robert missed more work, things got tense. The end came suddenly. One Tuesday morning in October, Linda didn't wake up. Robert held her hand and cried like he hadn't cried since he was a child. The funeral costs wiped out what little savings they had left, and within 3 months the bank took the house. Robert found himself living in his truck, then selling the truck to pay for a few months in a cheap motel. When that money ran out, he ended up where he never thought he would be, on the streets. For 3 years now, Robert had been living under the big concrete overpass where Interstate 40 crosses Miller Street. It wasn't the worst spot in town. The concrete kept most of the rain off, and the constant traffic noise helped drown out his thoughts at night. He had a sleeping bag that a church volunteer had given him, a small camp stove he'd bought at a thrift store, and a backpack with his few belongings. During the day, Robert would walk to different parts of town looking for odd jobs. He could fix fences, repair small engines, and he was still one of the best horse handlers in the county. Though not many people knew he was living on the streets. His beard was long now, and his clothes were clean but worn. He tried to stay presentable, but he knew he looked like what he was, a man who had lost everything. Most days, Robert would stop by Mickey's Diner on Route 7 around lunchtime. Mickey, the owner, had a soft spot for people down on their luck. He would let Robert sweep the parking lot or wash dishes for a meal and sometimes a few dollars. The work reminded Robert of better times when he had purpose and people depended on him. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, Robert was sitting at the counter nursing a cup of coffee that Mickey had given him on the house. The diner was busy with truckers and construction workers getting breakfast before their shifts. Robert usually kept to himself, but he couldn't help overhearing a conversation between 2 truck drivers at the table behind him. "Got another load heading south tomorrow," said the first driver, a big man with graying hair. "Same outfit as last week." "What kind of load this time?" asked his companion, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Horses again. 42 head going to that processing plant outside El Paso. Mix of older horses and some young ones that didn't sell at auction." Robert's hand tightened around his coffee cup. He knew what processing plant meant. These weren't horses going to new homes or even to work ranches. They were going to slaughter. "Shame about those 3 babies," the first driver continued. "Barely 6 months old. Their mama died birthing them up at the Golden Creek Ranch, and old Henderson can't afford to bottle feed them through the winter. Economy's got him selling off everything." Robert knew Henderson and the Golden Creek Ranch. He'd worked there briefly 5 years ago during their busy season. It was a small family operation that raised quarter horses. Henderson was a good man, but Robert had heard through the grapevine that the ranch was struggling financially. "Those little ones probably won't even make it to Mexico," the second driver said, shaking his head. "Too young, too stressed from losing their mama. It's a hard business sometimes." Robert felt something twist in his stomach. 3 baby horses, orphaned and scared, being loaded onto a truck to die. In his mind, he could see them clearly, probably bay or chestnut-colored with long legs and big frightened eyes. He'd raised orphan foals before, years ago when he worked at bigger ranches. It took patience and round-the-clock care, but it could be done. The truckers finished their breakfast and left, still talking about delivery schedules and route planning. Robert sat staring into his coffee, thinking about those 3 foals. He tried to push the thought away. What could he do? He was homeless, broke, and had no way to help anyone, let alone 3 horses. But the image wouldn't leave his mind. That afternoon, Robert walked the 12 miles out to Golden Creek Ranch. His legs were used to long walks by now, and the March air was crisp but not cold. The ranch looked worse than he remembered. Several fences needed repair, and the barn roof had missing shingles. Paint was peeling on the main house, and there were fewer horses in the pastures than there used to be. Robert found Tom Henderson in the main barn, filling water troughs. Henderson looked older, more tired than Robert remembered. When Henderson saw Robert approaching, his expression was guarded at first, then surprised when he recognized him. "Robert Williams, I heard you were—" Henderson paused, not wanting to say the wrong thing. "Living rough these days," Robert said simply. "I heard about your situation. The foals." Henderson's face got sad. 3 of them. Born in January when their mama died. I've been bottle feeding them, but I can't afford to keep it up through spring and summer. Feed costs are through the roof, and I've got bills stacking up. The bank's breathing down my neck. Can I see them? Henderson hesitated, then nodded. They walked to a smaller barn where Robert could hear the soft nickering of young horses. In 3 adjacent stalls were the most beautiful foals Robert had seen in years. 2 fillies and a colt, all a rich chestnut color with white markings on their faces. They were thin but healthy looking, and they approached the stall doors when they heard footsteps. "They're good babies," Henderson said quietly. "Smart, gentle. Their mama was one of my best mares. In a different world, I'd keep them all and train them myself." Robert reached through the stall bars to touch the nose of the nearest filly. Her breath was warm on his hand, and she didn't shy away from the stranger. These horses had been handled with love and care. "When are they being picked up?" Robert asked. "Tomorrow morning early. Truck comes at 6. Robert spent another hour at the ranch, helping Henderson with evening chores and getting to know the 3 foals. By the time he walked back to town, darkness was falling and his mind was made up. He couldn't save every horse headed for slaughter, but maybe he could save these 3. The problem was how. Robert had exactly $47 in his pocket, everything he'd earned in the past week doing odd jobs. He had no truck, no trailer, no property, and no legal way to stop what was going to happen in the morning. But Robert Williams had been working with horses for 30 years. He'd seen the worst of human nature and the best of it. He'd learned that sometimes you have to take a chance on doing the right thing, even when you don't know how it will work out. That night, lying in his sleeping bag under the overpass, Robert stared at the concrete ceiling and made plans. The truckers would be at Mickey's Diner again early in the morning. They always stopped there before long hauls. Maybe, just maybe, he could convince them to help him save 3 innocent lives. He thought about Linda and what she would say if she could see him now. She always believed that everything happened for a reason, that people were put in each other's paths when they needed each other most. Maybe his years on the streets, all the hardship and loss, had led him to this moment. Maybe he was supposed to hear that conversation in the diner. Maybe those 3 foals needed him as much as he needed them. Robert closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing with possibilities and problems. How do you convince truck drivers to risk their jobs? How do you care for 3 horses when you don't even have a roof over your own head? How do you build something from nothing? Tomorrow morning would bring answers to some of those questions. Robert just hoped he had the courage to ask them. Part 2. The desperate rescue. Robert was awake before dawn, sitting on an old crate outside Mickey's Diner when the first truck pulled into the parking lot at 5:30 a.m. The same 2 drivers from yesterday climbed out, stretching and yawning. Robert's heart pounded as he watched them walk toward the diner entrance. He took a deep breath and approached them. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I heard you talking yesterday about the horses you're picking up." The bigger driver, whose name tag read Dave, looked Robert up and down. Robert knew what he saw, a homeless man with worn clothes and desperate eyes. Not exactly someone you'd expect to be concerned about livestock transport. Yeah? What about it? Dave asked, not unfriendly but cautious. Those 3 foals, the babies, I want to buy them. The second driver, a younger man called Pete, laughed. Buy them? Mister, those horses are already sold. We're just transporting them. I know, Robert said quickly. But I also know that sometimes animals die during transport. Stress, health, problems, especially young ones. You said so yourself yesterday. Dave's expression changed. He studied Robert more carefully. You got paperwork? Bill of sale? Cash money? Robert pulled out his $47 and showed it to them. This is what I have right now. I know it's not much, but I'm not some crazy person. I worked horses for 30 years. I know Tom Henderson who's selling them. I know those foals. $47. Pete shook his head. Those horses are worth more than that, even at slaughter price. I'm not asking you to steal them, Robert said. I'm asking you to help me save them. You transport livestock all over the country. You've seen what happens at those processing plants. These are babies, 6 months old. They're scared, and they just lost their mother. Dave was quiet for a long moment. What's your story, friend? Why do you care about 3 horses you can't afford? Robert told them. About Linda. About losing everything. About living under the bridge. He told them about his years working with horses, about the foals he'd bottle-fed and trained. He pulled out his wallet and showed them an old photo of himself with Linda, standing next to a beautiful paint horse he'd trained years ago. I'm not asking for charity, Robert said. I'm asking for a chance. Those foals deserve better than dying scared in a strange place. If you help me get them, I'll find a way to care for them, I promise you that. Dave looked at Pete, then back at Robert. Even if we wanted to help, which I'm not saying we do, how would it work? We got manifests, paperwork, people expecting delivery. Robert had been thinking about this all night. Animals die in transport sometimes. Stress, heart problems, injuries. If 3 young foals died during loading or early transport, you'd have to dispose of the bodies locally, right? You wouldn't drive dead horses to Mexico. That's not exactly legal, Pete said nervously. It's not illegal either, Dave said slowly. If animals die during transport, we do have to handle disposal properly. Usually means calling a rendering company or a veterinarian. Robert felt a spark of hope. So if those 3 foals were too stressed and weak to make the trip, we'd have to report them as deceased and dispose of the bodies according to state regulations, Dave finished. But that would mean falsifying paperwork. Would it? Or would it mean doing the humane thing when animals are too young and weak to survive transport? Dave was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he looked at Pete. Remember that load of cattle we had 2 years ago? 3 calves died of stress before we even got out of Texas? Yeah, Pete said. Company didn't blame us. Said it happens with young animals sometimes. These foals, they're already stressed from losing their mama, Dave said thoughtfully. Been bottle-fed for months, probably never been in a trailer. Loading them could cause heart failure, panic attacks. Wouldn't be unusual for young horses to die from transport stress. Robert hardly dared to breathe. So you'll help me? Dave looked at his watch. We're supposed to be at Golden Creek in 30 minutes. If we're going to do this crazy thing, we need to do it right now. And I mean right now. What do you need me to do? First, you need a way to transport 3 horses. Can't help you there. We're not unloading company property into the diner parking lot. Robert's heart sank. He'd been so focused on convincing the drivers that he hadn't solved the practical problem of actually moving the horses. Wait, he said. Jerry's Auto and Salvage, about 2 miles from here. Old Jerry sometimes rents out trailers and equipment. He opens early. You got money for rental? Robert showed his $47 again. Dave sighed and pulled out his wallet. Pete, you in on this? Pete looked nervous but nodded. Those foals were pretty small. It would be cruel to transport them that far. Dave counted out money and handed it to Robert along with his business card. There's $300. Get a trailer, get those horses somewhere safe, and don't ever tell anyone where you got the money. We were never part of this conversation. I don't know how to thank you, Robert said. Don't thank us. Just take good care of those babies. And if anyone ever asks, we found 3 dead foals at the pickup site. Stress-related deaths during loading. Happens more than people think. Robert ran the 2 miles to Jerry's salvage yard. Jerry Morrison was already there, working on a stripped-down pickup truck. Jerry knew Robert from the neighborhood. He was one of the few people who would hire day labor without asking too many questions. "Jerry, I need to rent a horse trailer. Right now." Jerry looked up from the engine he was working on. "Horse trailer? Robert, you don't even have a truck. I can handle that part. How much for a small trailer just for today?" Jerry wiped his hands on a rag. "Well, I got an old 2-horse trailer out back. Hasn't been used in a year, but it's roadworthy. Normally I'd want $50 plus deposit, but..." He looked at Robert's desperate expression. "You in some kind of trouble?" "I'm trying to help some animals. 3 young horses that need a safe place." Jerry studied him for a moment. "You know how to handle horses?" 30 years experience." "All right, $40 for the day, no deposit. But Robert, I want it back in one piece, and if anyone asks, you rented it to move some furniture." Robert paid Jerry and helped him hitch the trailer to Jerry's old Ford pickup. "I need to borrow the truck too," Robert said. "Now you're pushing it." "Jerry, please. I'll have everything. Back by evening. These horses, they're just babies. They're going to die if I don't help them." Something in Robert's voice must have convinced him. Jerry handed over the keys. "Gas tank's half full. You put fuel in it before you bring it back. And Robert, whatever you're doing, be careful." Robert drove quickly to Golden Creek Ranch. The commercial transport truck was already there, and he could see Dave and Pete talking with Henderson near the barn. His heart raced as he parked and walked over. "Mr. Henderson?" Robert called out. "I'm here about the foals." Henderson looked confused. "Robert, I thought the transport was already here." Dave stepped forward smoothly. "Sir, we've got a problem. When we loaded the 3 youngest horses, they showed signs of severe stress. Heart palpitations, difficulty breathing. In our professional opinion, they won't survive long-distance transport." "What does that mean?" Henderson asked. "Means we can't take them," Pete added. "Company policy is clear. We don't transport animals that are likely to die en route. Bad for business and bad for the animals." Henderson looked devastated. "So what happens to them?" "Well," Dave said, "this gentleman here has offered to take them off your hands. Says he's got experience with young horses and can provide appropriate care." Henderson looked at Robert skeptically. "Robert, no offense, but how are you going to care for 3 horses?" Robert took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "Tom, I know how this looks. I know I'm not in a position to make promises about fancy facilities or expensive feed. But I also know horses, and I know these 3 babies. I can keep them alive and healthy until they're old enough and strong enough to find proper homes. Where would you keep them?" "I've got a place in mind. Old abandoned farm property about 5 miles north of town. Owner died last year and it's tied up in estate proceedings, but there's good pasture and a sound barn." This wasn't entirely true, but Robert had driven past the property many times during his wandering. It did have good grass and a barn that looked solid from the outside. Henderson was quiet for a long time, looking from Robert to the truck drivers to the barn where the foals were waiting. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but Robert, if those horses die because they're not getting proper care..." "They won't," Robert said firmly. "I give you my word." The next hour was a blur of activity. Dave and Pete helped load the foals into Robert's borrowed trailer, making sure to document the transport refusal due to health concerns for their company records. Henderson signed papers releasing the horses to Robert's care. As the commercial truck pulled away, Robert found himself standing in a dusty ranch yard with 3 frightened foals and no clear idea what came next. But for the first time in 3 years, he had a purpose that felt bigger than just surviving another day. Part 3. Building from Nothing. The abandoned property Robert had mentioned was called Willow Creek Farm, and it was even worse than he'd feared. The main house had broken windows and a collapsed front porch. The barn roof leaked in 3 places, and the fencing was mostly fallen down or missing entirely. But there were 20 acres of good pasture grass, a well that still worked, and the basic structure of what had once been a working horse farm. Robert parked the trailer in front of the barn and sat for a moment, listening to the foals moving restlessly inside. What had he done? 3 months ago, his biggest worry was finding enough work to buy dinner. Now he was responsible for 3 lives that depended on him completely. The first priority was getting the foals safely unloaded and secured. The barn had 4 stalls, and though they needed cleaning and repair, they were solid enough to hold young horses temporarily. Robert spent 2 hours clearing debris, checking for hazards, and making basic repairs with tools he found scattered around the property. When he finally opened the trailer, the 3 foals stumbled out on shaky legs, eyes wide with fear. They huddled together in the barn aisle, trembling. The largest, the colt, had a small cut on his leg from the transport. One of the fillies was limping slightly. "Easy now," Robert said softly, the way he'd talked to countless horses over the years. "You're safe now. I know you miss your mama, but you're going to be okay." It took patience and gentle coaxing to get each foal into a stall. Robert used hay from old bales he'd found in the loft. It was dusty but still good. He rigged temporary water buckets and checked each horse carefully for injuries. Apart from minor scrapes and stress, they seemed healthy. The real problem was food. These foals had been bottle-fed since birth, and they needed special nutrition to grow properly. Robert had no money left after paying for the trailer rental and gas. He sat in the dusty barn as evening fell, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when he remembered Dr. Patricia Reeves. 5 years ago, when Robert was still working regularly, Dr. Reeves had been called to treat a horse he was training that had gotten tangled in wire fencing. She was a young veterinarian who had just opened her practice in town. Robert had been impressed by how gently she handled the frightened animal, and how thoroughly she explained the treatment. More importantly, Robert had heard through the local network of animal people that Dr. Reeves sometimes provided free care for pets belonging to homeless individuals. It was worth a try. The next morning, Robert walked the 8 miles into town and found Dr. Reeves's clinic on Maple Street. The waiting room was busy with people bringing in dogs and cats for routine. "Got her." Robert felt out of place in his worn clothes, but the receptionist was polite when he asked to speak with the doctor about an emergency. Dr. Reeves came out between appointments looking puzzled when she saw Robert. She was a small woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Dr. Reeves, I'm Robert Williams. I used to work at some of the ranches around here. You might remember treating a gelding that got cut up in wire fencing about 5 years back." Her expression cleared. "Yes, I remember. Beautiful horse, very well trained. You did excellent work with him. How can I help you today?" Robert told her about the foals, about the rescue, about his current situation. Dr. Reeves listened without interrupting, her expression growing more interested rather than skeptical. "These are the 3 foals from Golden Creek Ranch?" she asked. "I heard Tom Henderson was having to sell his herd." "Yes. They're at the old Willow Creek property right now, but I don't have money for proper feed or veterinary care. I was hoping maybe you could look at them. Make sure they're healthy after the stress of yesterday." Dr. Reeves was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Williams, are you currently homeless?" Robert nodded, embarrassed. "And you took on the responsibility of caring for 3 orphaned foals?" "I know how it sounds, but I couldn't let them go to slaughter. They're just babies." Dr. Reeves smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Robert had received from anyone in months. "It sounds like something someone who really cares about animals would do. Let me finish my appointments and I'll drive out to see them this afternoon." When Dr. Reeves arrived at Willow Creek that afternoon, Robert was working on fence repairs, using tools he'd found around the property. She parked her veterinary truck near the barn and walked over to where Robert was stretching wire. "Interesting choice of location," she said, looking around at the run-down property. "Who owns this place now?" "Old man named Clayton owned it. Died about 8 months ago. I heard in town that it's tied up in probate court. Family fighting over the estate. Nobody's been here since the funeral. So you're essentially squatting." Robert stopped working and looked at her directly. "Yes, ma'am, I am. If that changes your mind about helping the horses, I understand. Actually, it makes me more impressed. You could have walked away from those foals and continued living your quiet life under the bridge. Instead, you took on a huge responsibility, and you're trying to do right by them, even though you have nothing. She spent an hour examining each foal thoroughly. They were all healthy despite the stress of the past few days, though they needed better nutrition and regular worming. The colt's cut was minor and healing well. They're in remarkably good condition, she told Robert. Tom Henderson did a good job bottle feeding them, and you've kept them calm and secure. But they need specialized feed for growing horses, and they need their vaccinations updated. I know. I just don't know how to pay for it. Dr. Reeves walked around the property, examining the barn, the pastures, the old farmhouse. This place has good bones, she said. With some work, it could be a decent small horse operation again, if someone owned it legally. What if someone did? Dr. Reeves asked. What would you do then? Robert thought about it. I'd fix the fences, repair the barn roof, get the pastures in better shape, maybe take in a few more horses that needed homes. I've got nothing but time and I know the work. That evening, Dr. Reeves made some phone calls. The first was to Angela Martinez, a social worker who specialized in helping homeless veterans. Dr. Reeves had worked with Angela before on cases where pet ownership was helping someone transition back into stable housing. I've got an interesting case, Dr. Reeves told Angela over the phone. Homeless veteran who rescued 3 horses from slaughter. He's living on an abandoned farm, trying to care for them with nothing but determination and skill. Angela was intrigued. What kind of military background? I haven't asked yet, but I suspect Army. He handles stress well, shows good problem-solving skills, takes responsibility seriously. Does he know about veteran services, housing assistance, medical care, job training programs? I don't think he knows about any of it. He seems to have been flying under the radar since his wife died. Angela made plans to visit Willow Creek the next day. Dr. Reeves's second call was to Judge Patricia Collins, who handled probate cases for the county. She'd known Judge Collins for years through the local animal rescue community. Patricia, I need some information about the Willow Creek farm estate. The old Clayton place. That's been a mess, Judge Collins said. 3 heirs, all fighting over the property. None of them want to actually run a farm, but they all want their share of the sale money. Meanwhile, the place is falling apart and the legal bills are eating up the estate value. What would it take to resolve the probate? Honestly, someone needs to make an offer that's fair enough to satisfy the heirs and cover the legal costs, but it would have to be someone who could actually use the property appropriately. The county doesn't want it turning into a junkyard or getting chopped up for development. Dr. Reeves had an idea forming, but it would take some research and planning. The next day, Angela Martinez drove out to Willow Creek. She found Robert working on stall repairs, while the 3 foals grazed in a small paddock he'd managed to fence off. She was impressed by what she saw. A man who was clearly skilled and hard-working, taking excellent care of animals that depended on him. Mr. Williams, I'm Angela Martinez. Dr. Reeves asked me to come talk with you. Robert paused his work. About what? About the fact that you're a military veteran who's been living without support services you're entitled to. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I served 8 years in the Army, but that was a long time ago and I've been managing on my own. Have you, though? Really managing? Or just surviving? Angela spent 2 hours learning Robert's story. His military service, his marriage, Linda's illness and death, the financial collapse that followed. She also learned about his extensive experience with horses, his reputation as a skilled trainer, and his dream of someday running his own small horse operation. Robert, there are programs that could help you transition into stable housing, get medical and mental health support, even provide funding for education or starting a small business. I'm not looking for handouts. I'm not offering handouts. I'm talking about services you earned through military service and programs designed to help people who are working to rebuild their lives. That afternoon, Dr. Reeves returned with supplies, proper full feed worming medication and vitamin supplements. She also brought news. Part 4. The unexpected turn 6. Months later, Willow Creek Farm looked like a completely different place. The barn roof was repaired, the fences were straight and strong, and the 3 foals had grown into beautiful yearlings. Robert had put on weight and looked healthier than he had in years. With Angela's help, he'd gotten into veteran housing assistance and received medical care he'd been putting off for too long. The partnership with Dr. Reeves was working better than either of them had expected. Word had spread through the local horse community about the rescue operation at Willow Creek. They'd taken in 6 more horses, an old mare whose owner couldn't afford her care anymore, 2 geldings rescued from a neglect situation, and 3 more young horses whose owners had lost their jobs and couldn't keep them. Robert had a gift for working with troubled horses. His gentle patience and years of experience meant that even the most frightened animals learned to trust him. The 3 original foals had become his special ambassadors, friendly and well-trained examples of what rescue horses could become. Every morning, Robert would lead the horses out to pasture and spend time working with each one individually. The colt, whom he'd named Thunder, had grown into a strong, intelligent young horse with natural athletic ability. The 2 fillies, Star and Misty, were smaller but equally smart, with gentle temperaments that would make them perfect family horses, someday. Dr. Reeves stopped by regularly, not just for veterinary care but to help with the business side of the rescue. They'd managed to place 4 horses in good homes, and donations were starting to come in from people who'd heard about their work. "You know," Dr. Reeves said one afternoon as she watched Robert work with Thunder, "we should think about getting some publicity for what you're doing here. Local newspaper, maybe social media. More people knowing about the rescue means more potential adopters and donors." Robert was hesitant. He'd gotten comfortable with the quiet life at Willow Creek and wasn't sure he wanted public attention. But he also knew that more publicity could mean helping more horses. "What did you have in mind?" "Let me make some calls. I know a reporter at the county newspaper who does human interest stories, and my niece is always talking about making videos for the internet. Maybe we could show people what you've accomplished here." 2 weeks later, Jennifer Walsh from the County Tribune came out to interview Robert and photograph the horses. She was a young reporter who specialized in local success stories, and she was fascinated by Robert's journey from homelessness to running a horse rescue. "This is an incredible story," she told Robert as she watched him work with the 3 yearlings. "Man loses everything, saves horses from slaughter, builds a new life helping other animals. People love stories like this." The article appeared in the Tribune the following Sunday, with a large photo of Robert standing with Thunder, Star, and Misty in front of the rebuilt barn. The headline read, "From Streets to Stable, Local Veteran Builds Horse Rescue from Nothing." Dr. Reeves's niece, Casey, was a college student who ran a popular social media account about animal rescue. She asked if she could make a video about Willow Creek Farm. "I won't show your face if you don't want," she promised Robert. "But people need to see what you've done with these horses. And social media is where the younger generation gets their information about animal rescue." Robert agreed, and Casey spent a morning filming the horses and interviewing Robert about his training methods. She was particularly impressed by how well-behaved and trusting all the rescued horses were. "Most people don't understand how much work this takes," Casey said, as she filmed Robert grooming Thunder. "They think you just put horses in a pasture and feed them. They don't see the daily training, the relationship building, the medical care." Casey's video was posted on a Tuesday afternoon. By Thursday, it had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from horse lovers all over the country, praising Robert's work and asking how they could help support the rescue. But it was a comment from someone named William Chen that changed everything. "This story reminds me why I fell in love with horses in the first place. I'd like to visit your facility and discuss how I might be able to help." William Chen turned out to be a successful businessman from California who owned several tech companies. But more importantly, he was also a horse enthusiast who had been looking for meaningful ways to support equine rescue work. 2 weeks later, a black sedan pulled into the driveway at Willow Creek Farm. Robert was working in the barn when Dr. Reeves called to him. "Robert, I think your visitor is here." William Chen was not what Robert had expected. He was a quiet, well-dressed man in his 50s, who moved slowly and seemed to be studying everything carefully. He introduced himself politely and asked if he could see the horses. "I read about your story in the newspaper," Chen said as they walked toward the pasture where the yearlings were grazing. "Then I saw the video online. I have to say, I'm impressed by what you've built here." "It's not much," Robert said modestly. "It's everything," Chen corrected him. "You took 3 horses that were going to die and turned them into this." He gestured toward Thunder, who was approaching the fence with friendly curiosity. Chen spent 2 hours at the farm, asking detailed questions about Robert's training methods, the rescue's finances, and plans for the future. He was particularly interested in Thunder and the 2 fillies. "These 3 are special," Chen said, watching as Robert worked with Star on basic ground manners. "They're not just well-trained, they're confident, trusting, intelligent. That doesn't happen by accident." "They've been through a lot," Robert said, "but horses are forgiving if you treat them right." As they talked, Robert learned that Chen had lost his own beloved horse 6 months earlier. A mare named Phoenix, who had been his riding companion for 15 years, had died suddenly from colic. "I've been thinking about getting another horse," Chen said, "but I wasn't sure I was ready. Then I saw your video and realized maybe what I need isn't to replace Phoenix, but to help horses like these 3 find their purpose." Before he left, Chen asked Robert about his biggest challenges and dreams for the rescue. "Honestly? Space and funding," Robert said. "We're doing good work here, but we can only help so many horses. I'd love to expand, maybe specialize in training, rescue horses for therapeutic work or sport. But that would require more land, better facilities, professional help." Chen was quiet for a moment. "What if I told you those problems could be solved?" 3 days later, Chen called with a proposal that left Robert speechless. "I want to offer you a position as head trainer at my equestrian facility in California," Chen said. "Full salary, benefits, housing on the property. But more than that, I want to fund a major expansion of your rescue work. We could create a model program that other rescues could copy." Robert was overwhelmed. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate the offer, but I can't just abandon what we've built here." "I'm not asking you to abandon it. I'm asking you to expand it. We could establish rescue partnerships across multiple states, fund proper facilities, hire other trainers. Your 3 horses could be the foundation of something much bigger." That evening, Robert sat in the barn with Thunder, Star, and Misty, trying to process what he'd been offered. A year ago, he'd been sleeping under a bridge with nothing but a backpack. Now a millionaire was offering him a chance to build something that could help thousands of horses. But there was something Chen hadn't told him yet, something that would make the decision even more complicated. The next morning, Chen called again. "Robert, there's something else I need to tell you about your horses. I had a friend of mine, a bloodline specialist, look at the photos and videos of Thunder. He thinks Thunder might be related to some very valuable racing lines." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we should do some genetic testing. If Thunder is what we think he might be, he could be worth a lot of money. Enough money to fund your rescue work for decades." Robert looked out at the 3 yearlings playing in the morning sun. Thunder was chasing the fillies around the pasture, his tail high and his movement graceful and powerful. Robert had always known the colt was special, but he'd never thought about him in terms of monetary value. "What happens if the testing shows he's valuable?" "That depends on what you want to happen. We could breed him and use the income for rescue work. We could sell him to a racing stable and donate the money. We could keep him and train him for sport. The choice would be yours." Robert realized that this decision would determine not just his own future, but the future of every horse that might be helped by what they built. 3 scared foals, saved from slaughter, had somehow become the key to saving thousands of other horses. But first, they needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. The genetic testing would tell them whether Thunder was just a well-bred rescue horse or something much more valuable than anyone had imagined. Part 5. The Shocking Revelation. The genetic testing results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would change everything Robert thought he knew about the 3 horses he'd saved. Dr. Reeves was present when William Chen called with the laboratory report, and Robert put the phone on speaker so she could hear. "Robert, are you sitting down?" Chen's voice was excited but controlled. "The results are back on Thunder's bloodline analysis." "What did they find?" "Thunder is a direct descendant of Northern Dancer, one of the most famous racehorses in history. His mother's bloodline traces back to some of the most valuable racing stock ever bred. On paper, this horse is worth between $300,000 and $500,000. Dr. Reeves gasped. Robert was silent for a long moment, watching Thunder through the window as the young horse grazed peacefully in the morning sun. "That's impossible," Robert finally said. Tom Henderson was a small ranch operation. He raised quarter horses for local riders, not thoroughbred racing stock. "That's what makes this so remarkable," Chen explained. Henderson probably had no idea what he had. The mare that died giving birth to these foals must have been acquired without full knowledge of her pedigree. It happens more often than you'd think. Valuable horses end up in unexpected places through estate sales, divorces, or simple lack of paperwork. Robert walked outside and approached Thunder, who nickered softly and came to the fence for attention. This gentle, trusting horse that had been hours away from slaughter was potentially worth more money than Robert had ever seen in his life. "What does this mean for the rescue?" Robert asked. "It means you have choices. If you want to sell Thunder to a racing stable, the money could fund rescue operations for decades. If you want to keep him and establish a breeding program, the income from his foals could support hundreds of horses every year. Or we could do something completely different." Over the next week, Robert found himself in a position he'd never imagined. Horse industry professionals were calling, wanting to see Thunder and make offers. Racing stable owners were proposing partnerships. Breeding farms were suggesting lucrative contracts. But Robert had learned something important during his years of hardship. Money wasn't everything, and making decisions based purely on financial gain rarely led to happiness. "I want to do something different," Robert told Chen during one of their many phone conversations. "Something that honors what these horses have been through and what they represent." "What are you thinking?" Robert had been developing an idea, something that combined his experience working with troubled horses and his years of understanding what it felt like to be forgotten by society. "I want to create a program that pairs rescue horses with people who need healing. Veterans with trauma, kids who've been through tough times, elderly people who are isolated. I want to use Thunder and the fillies as therapy horses while also building a rescue that saves other animals." Chen was intrigued. "That's not a typical business model for a valuable horse." "I know, but Thunder was saved from slaughter because someone cared more about his life than his economic value. I think he should be used to save other lives the same way." What happened next surprised everyone, including Robert. Chen not only agreed to fund the therapeutic riding program, he proposed something even more ambitious. He wanted to purchase land adjacent to Willow Creek Farm and establish a comprehensive facility that would serve as a model for horse-assisted therapy programs nationwide. "We'll keep your 3 original horses as the foundation of the program," Chen explained. "Thunder will be our primary therapy horse, but we'll also establish a breeding program with him that funds the entire operation. Star and Misty will be trained for different types of therapeutic work, Misty for children's programs, Star for veteran counseling sessions." The facility, which they decided to call Second Chances Ranch, began construction 6 months later. It included a modern barn, indoor and outdoor riding arenas, comfortable housing for staff, and specialized facilities for different types of therapy programs. But the real magic happened when the first clients arrived. Robert's first veteran client was a young woman named Jessica, who had lost both legs in an overseas deployment. She was angry, depressed, and convinced that her life was over. When Robert introduced her to Thunder, something remarkable happened. "This horse was going to be killed," Robert told Jessica as Thunder stood calmly beside her wheelchair. "He'd lost his mother, he was scared, and nobody wanted him. But he survived, and now he's here to help people like you find their strength again." Thunder seemed to understand his role instinctively. He stood perfectly still while Jessica transferred from her wheelchair to his back. He walked smoothly and responded to the slightest touch of the reins. Most importantly, he gave Jessica a sense of power and mobility she thought she'd lost forever. Within 3 months, Jessica was riding independently and helping train other veteran clients. She eventually became one of the program's certified instructors. The children's program was equally successful. Star proved to have a special gift for working with kids who had been through trauma. Her gentle nature and patient temperament helped children learn to trust again, often for the first time since their traumatic experiences. Misty became the star of the Senior Citizens program. Elderly clients who hadn't been active in years found themselves grooming, feeding, and riding her. Many reported that their weekly visits to Second Chances Ranch were the highlight of their lives. But perhaps the most surprising development was what happened with Thunder's first foal. When Thunder was bred to a carefully selected mare, the resulting foal inherited not just valuable bloodlines, but also his father's remarkable temperament for therapeutic work. The foal, named Hope, was donated to a children's hospital where she became part of an innovative program, bringing therapy horses directly to young patients who couldn't leave the medical facility. The success of Hope's work led to requests from hospitals, schools, and treatment centers across the country. Within 2 years, Second Chances Ranch was breeding and training therapy horses that were being placed in facilities nationwide. The financial model worked exactly as Chen had predicted. Thunder's breeding fees and the sale of carefully selected foals funded not just the therapy programs but also an expanded rescue operation that was saving over 100 horses per year. But for Robert, the most important measure of success wasn't the money or the media attention the program received. It was moments like the afternoon when he watched a young veteran who had attempted suicide 6 months earlier, teaching a group of children how to brush Star's mane. "You know what the secret is?" the veteran was telling the kids. "These horses can tell if you're sad or scared or angry, but they don't judge you for it. They just want to help you feel better." Robert realized that this was exactly what had happened to him under the interstate overpass 18 months earlier. Thunder, Star, and Misty had needed him, but he had needed them just as much. They had all rescued each other. 5 years after the rescue, Second Chances Ranch was featured in national magazines and served as a model for similar programs around the world. Thunder had sired over 30 foals, many of whom were working as therapy horses. Star and Misty had helped hundreds of people rediscover their confidence and strength. But Robert still started every morning the same way, by walking out to the pasture where his 3 original horses grazed peacefully in the dawn light. Thunder would always approach the fence first, nickering softly and pushing his nose against Robert's hand. "Good morning, old friend," Robert would say, the same greeting he'd used since that first frightening night in the abandoned barn. "Ready to help some people today?" Thunder's response was always the same, a gentle nudge and a look that seemed to say he understood exactly what his purpose was, and he was ready to fulfill it. The homeless man who had risked everything to save 3 unwanted foals had created something that would touch thousands of lives for generations to come. But more than that, he had proven something important about the power of compassion, the value of second chances, and the incredible things that can happen when someone refuses to give up on those who have been forgotten by the world. The 3 horses that were hours away from death had not just survived. They had become healers, teachers, and symbols of hope for anyone who had ever felt discarded or worthless. Their story proved that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be measured in money, but in the lives they touch and the hope they create. And every morning, as Robert watched his horses begin another day of bringing healing to others, he remembered Linda's words about everything happening for a reason. Maybe his years of loss and hardship had been preparing him for this moment, when he would need to recognize that 3 scared baby horses were actually a gift that would change not just his life, but the lives of countless others who needed to believe that rescue and redemption were always possible.